"You're back," the man said. "They won't like that." They raised an eyebrow. "Who won't like it?" The man hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer. "The HOA board. They were trying something with your place. Couldn't understand it myself, but they talked like they were sure you weren't coming back." He felt a strange mix of anger and confusion. How could they be so confident about something that wasn't true? "What exactly did they say?" he asked. The man crossed his arms as though preparing to speak carefully. "They talked about taking the cabin under some rule. Something about neglected properties or lots that become burdens. They said they had the right to claim it if the owner wasn't showing up." That statement made his heart beat a little faster. He had never heard of such a rule. And knowing the HOA, if they had such power, they would have used it long ago on others. He asked a few more questions, wrote down everything the man said, and thanked him before leaving. By the time he reached his cabin again, the folder was full of new details. But along with the information, he also felt something else, a growing determination. Whatever the HOA was planning, he now had enough pieces to start seeing the bigger picture. He stepped inside the cabin, placed the folder on the table, and took a long breath. He knew he couldn't solve the whole situation alone. It was time to talk to someone who understood property rights better than any neighbor. He reached for his phone and called a friend who worked in real estate. The call rang for a moment before being answered. "Hey," his friend said warmly. "You're back at the cabin?" He explained everything from the notices on his door to the conversation with the HOA board member and the strange confidence she had shown. His friend listened closely, not interrupting. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. "That doesn't sound normal," his friend finally said. "And from what you're describing, it also sounds like they overstepped. I've never heard of an HOA having the power to take full ownership of a property because someone was away. Not without a legal case, and certainly not without plenty of documented warnings." He felt relieved hearing that, even if it didn't solve the problem. His friend continued, "Do you have proof you didn't abandon it? Bills, travel dates, anything like that?" "Yes, I have everything," he replied. "Good. Keep them safe, and don't sign anything they give you. I'll look into similar cases and call you later." He thanked his friend and hung up. For the first time in days, he felt like he wasn't alone in this. Later in the afternoon, he decided to walk around the property line. Not because he expected to find anything new, but because he needed to clear his head. The woods surrounding the cabin were calm, and the soft breeze helped ease some of the stress. But halfway through the walk, he froze. He noticed small wooden stakes placed in the ground near the back corner of his property. They looked new, freshly hammered in, with bright orange flags attached. He hadn't seen them before. His heart beat faster. He walked closer and crouched down, noticing numbers written on the stakes. They seemed like markers, the kind surveyors used when measuring land. But he hadn't hired anyone, and no one had permission to step on his property. He looked around, scanning the area, but no one was there. He stood up, confused and frustrated. This wasn't an accident. Someone had been on his land again, without warning, without permission. He pulled out his phone and took pictures of the stakes, making sure to capture their positions and markings clearly. Then he followed the line of flags, finding more stakes stretching a short distance along the back edge. At one point, he stopped walking. One of the stakes had a small tag attached to it, and on the tag was the name of the surveying company. He took a picture of it too. When he returned to the cabin, the first thing he did was write down what he had seen. Then he searched online for the company and made a call. A woman answered. "Hi. I'm calling about a survey done near my cabin," he said slowly. "There are new stakes on my property, and your company name is on one of them." The woman checked the system and asked for the location. After he gave her the address, she paused. "I see a work order," she said, "but it wasn't placed by you." "It was placed by a homeowners association." He closed his eyes for a moment. He needed to stay calm. "What exactly did they request?" he asked. "It says they wanted the boundaries measured for reassignment." Reassignment. His hands tightened around the phone. "Can you tell me when the work was done?" 3 days ago, she replied. 3 days ago, before he returned, he thanked her. ended the call, and rubbed his forehead. This was no misunderstanding. This was a clear plan. The HOA wasn't guessing. They weren't confused. They weren't making a simple mistake. They were preparing to claim his land by evening. Clouds covered the sky, and the wind grew colder. He stood on the porch looking out at the quiet woods. Despite the peaceful scene, his thoughts churned. He had proof now, pictures, statements from neighbors, information from the survey company. But tomorrow, he needed to confront the HOA again. Not with anger, but with calm, solid facts. As the last light of the day faded, he sat down at the porch step and took a deep breath. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about stopping people who believed they could twist rules, push boundaries, and take what didn't belong to them. And he was finally ready to push back. He stood up, went inside, and prepared for the next day. Nothing about this fight would be easy, but he wasn't backing down now. The morning felt different, heavier than the others. He woke before the sun rose, sitting quietly on the edge of the bed as a soft gray light settled over the room. Today was the day he would face the HOA again, but this time he wasn't walking in confused or unprepared. He had proof, he had witnesses, and he had the truth on his side. Still, there was something tense in the air, something that made him breathe slower and think carefully. He moved through the cabin silently, brewing tea and placing all the documents neatly inside the folder he had been building for days. Every paper, every note, every picture was in order. He knew he wouldn't be raising his voice today. He didn't need to. Facts would be enough. After taking one last look around the cabin, he stepped outside. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet, and the sky was still pale. He locked the door behind him and walked down the path toward the small community hall where the HOA held meetings. As he approached, he saw a few cars parked outside. To his surprise, there were more people than usual standing near the entrance, neighbors he had spoken to. Some he hadn't seen in months, and even a few unfamiliar faces. A low murmur moved through the crowd, and several people turned to look at him as he walked toward the steps. He didn't say anything at first. He simply nodded politely and made his way toward the door. But before he could enter, one of the neighbors, a man who had always kept to himself, stepped forward. "You're going in there today?" the man asked quietly. He nodded. "I have to." The man shifted uncomfortably. "Be careful. They don't seem happy that you're back." He offered a calm smile. "That's fine. I'm not here to make them happy." With that, he stepped inside. The room felt colder than usual, and the board members sat at a long table facing the door. The same woman who had spoken so boldly during his first visit sat in the center, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She didn't greet him. She simply watched as he took a seat. Other residents filled the chairs behind him, some whispering quietly, others simply observing. After a moment, the woman cleared her throat. "We didn't expect you so soon," she said. He opened his folder slowly. "I didn't expect to find survey markers on my land," he replied calmly. A flicker of surprise crossed her face, but she quickly recovered. "The survey was part of an assessment," she said. "Standard procedure." He placed the photos on the table in front of him. "Standard procedure doesn't involve entering private property without permission," he said. "Nor does it involve planning a reassignment of land that already has a legal owner." A few people in the room shifted in their seats. The woman straightened in her chair. "The board acted according to the rules. Your property was considered," he raised his hand slightly, stopping her. "Considered abandoned," he finished for her. "Yes, you mentioned that. But you didn't have the authority to make that claim." He took out another paper, a copy of his travel dates, along with bills showing ongoing utilities. "I was away temporarily, not permanently. My bills were paid. The property was maintained. I never received any warnings or letters about neglect." The woman opened her mouth to respond, but he continued, "And even if there were concerns, the correct process would have required documented notices sent directly to me. Notices that never arrived." He placed the unopened mailbox slip on the table. "You posted things on my door that were never mailed," he said. "Posting something on an empty property doesn't count as communication." She shifted uncomfortably now, and some board members exchanged uneasy looks. When he returned to his small cabin after months of being away, he felt the same quiet excitement he always did when he drove up that old gravel road. The cabin had been his escape for years, one place where he could breathe without thinking about deadlines, traffic, or noise. He had worked out of state for a long stretch of time, and although the job was demanding, he kept telling himself that the first night back at the cabin would make everything worth it. But the moment he stepped out of his truck, the feeling in his chest shifted. Something looked wrong. At first he thought it was just the overgrown weeds around the steps or the fallen pine branches blown down during storms. That was normal. But then he noticed a bright-colored paper stapled to the front door. Another one was taped to the window. A third was flapping against the porch railing. He walked closer and pulled one off. His eyebrows lifted as he read the bold letters. It was a notice for unpaid dues from a homeowners association he had never heard of. He looked around, half expecting someone to jump out with a hidden camera, as if it were some kind of prank. But the forest was quiet. The way it always was. His cabin was far outside the community that had built up down the road over the past few years. He knew about the subdivision, but he had assumed they kept to themselves the same way he did. He had never received a letter from them, never spoken to anyone from there, and certainly never joined their association. Yet the paper in his hand insisted he owed months of fees, landscaping charges, and penalties. He took a deep breath and stepped inside the cabin. The air smelled stale from being closed up for so long, but it was familiar. He opened the windows to let the breeze in and set his bags down. But he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something strange was happening. He sat at the small kitchen table, spread out all the notices he had pulled off the door, and read them one by one. Each one sounded more aggressive than the last. They accused him of leaving the property abandoned. They claimed his cabin fell under their rules. They even threatened further action if he didn't respond. He leaned back in the chair and rubbed his forehead. It didn't make sense. His cabin was on land he purchased long before the subdivision was built. He had the paperwork to prove it, and the county records should reflect the same thing. After unpacking enough for the night, walked outside and looked around. The sun was setting through the trees, casting long shadows across his yard. He used to love that time of day, when the world felt quiet and calm. But now it just reminded him that something was off. A neighbor named only by his quiet presence rather than any long introduction lived a bit down the road, and he decided to check in. The neighbor was sitting on a small porch with a cup of tea. When he walked up, "You look like you've seen something." "Odd," the neighbor said with a raised eyebrow. He explained. "The papers and how none of it made sense." The neighbor nodded slowly, almost like he had been expecting this conversation. "That HOA down the road has been getting a little too bold," the neighbor said. "They've been trying to pull in places that were never part of their plan. They tried something like that with the folks near the creek last year. Didn't get far, but they tried." The man listened carefully, feeling both relieved to know someone else understood and frustrated that the HOA had a history of pushing boundaries. "Live up here long enough to know your cabin isn't part of their area," the neighbor continued. "Your place was here before any of their homes were built. They can't just decide you're under them. But they're banking on people being too tired to fight back." The man thanked the neighbor and headed back home, the sky now nearly dark. He stepped inside the cabin and turned on the single warm light above the table. The papers still sat there, scattered in a small, messy pile. He stared at them for a long moment. He wasn't looking for trouble. He never had. But he wasn't the type to let anyone push him around, especially not when he knew he was in the right. He ate a simple dinner and sat by the window for a bit, watching the night settle over the woods. The sound of crickets filled the air, and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. Normally, it would have been calming. Tonight, it only reminded him that things might not stay peaceful for long, as he got ready for bed. He replayed the neighbor's words. If the HOA had tried something like this before, that meant they were testing how much they could get away with. And if they had gone as far as plastering his cabin with warnings, they probably planned to escalate. He checked the front door one more time before turning off the lights. Everything was locked. Everything was still. He lay down, hoping he could sleep, but his mind kept circling the same thoughts. He wondered how long the HOA had been doing this, He wondered who approved their behavior, or if anyone did. Most of all, he wondered what they would try next. Early the next morning, he brewed himself a cup of coffee and stepped onto the porch. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the familiar scent of pine. For a moment, he let himself enjoy it. Then he saw a small movement near the end of his driveway. A car was pulling up. A shiny one, spotless. The kind you expect from someone who cares more about rules than about the land they're standing on. 3 people stepped out. All of them wore matching polo shirts with the HOA logo embroidered on the chest. They carried clipboards, folders, and the kind of expressions that suggested they believed they were in charge. The man placed his coffee on the railing and waited as they approached. "Good morning," one of the board members said, wearing a smile that didn't reach the eyes. "We're here to discuss the outstanding issues with your property." He crossed his arms, calm but firm. "I don't think you have any issues with my property," he replied quietly. The board member opened a folder. "According to our updated map, your cabin now falls under our association's jurisdiction. As such, you're responsible for paying dues and maintaining the standards we set for all members." "I never joined your HOA," he said, "and my land is outside your subdivision. This cabin was here long before your neighborhood existed." The smile disappeared. Another board member stepped forward, tapping the clipboard. The expansion was approved internally. All properties within the extended boundary are now included, whether they were originally part of the community or not. If you review our notices, you'll see that you're several months behind in payments. He felt irritation rising, but kept his voice steady. "I wasn't even here for months. And again, I am not, and never have been, part of your association." The first board member sighed. "We're trying to handle this politely, but we do have procedures for unresponsive property owners. You'll want to take this seriously." He looked at them carefully, sensing the pressure they were trying to create. "I'll take it seriously when you show me legal proof that you have authority over my land." A brief silence followed. The board members exchanged glances, looking slightly annoyed. "We'll return with the necessary documentation," one finally said. "But understand this, your property is not exempt from community rules." And they turned and walked back to their car. He watched them drive away, the gravel popping under the tires. For a moment, he stood still, letting everything sink in. The peaceful morning he had hoped for had turned into something entirely different. Not only were they claiming control over his cabin, but they believed they had the power to pressure him into accepting it. He picked up his coffee again and took a slow sip. The taste was strong and familiar, grounding him in the moment. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't a clerical error. The HOA was trying to reach beyond its borders, and they were confident no one would stand up to them. But they had chosen the wrong person. He went back inside, grabbed a notebook, and began writing down everything that had happened since he arrived. Times, dates, what they said, every detail he could remember. He took photos of the notices. He walked around the property, recording videos and marking anything that looked out of place. He wasn't preparing for a fight he didn't want. He was preparing because he sensed a fight was coming whether he liked it or not, and he knew one thing for sure: the HOA had just made their first mistake. The next morning started quietly, but it didn't take long for that calm to disappear. He woke up early, hoping he could clear his mind and enjoy the stillness he had always loved about the cabin. The sunlight peeked through the trees, the birds were singing, and for a moment he felt like everything might settle back into place. But that hope faded as soon as he remembered the visit from the HOA board the day before. Their tone, their confidence, the way they spoke, as if he owed them something they weren't finished with him. He knew it. The papers on his table were a reminder that trouble had already reached his door. He stepped onto the porch with a cup of hot coffee in hand and breathed in the cool morning air. He stood quietly, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. But his mind kept circling the same idea. This wasn't going to stop on its own. The HOA clearly believed they had power over him, and if they were bold enough to show up uninvited once, they'd do it again, as if the universe wanted to prove his suspicion right. He heard the sound of another vehicle approaching. This time, it wasn't a single Corvette, it was 2, both shiny, both clean. and both clearly out of place on his old dirt road. A slight groan escaped him. Not because he was afraid, but because he could already feel the headache forming. The vehicles parked near his driveway, and once again, people stepped out wearing the same matching shirts with the same HOA logo. But today they looked more serious, like they had come with a mission. One held a folder so thick it looked like it was filled with every paper they owned. Another carried a camera. He set his coffee cup down on the porch, railing, and walked down the steps to meet them halfway. "Morning," he said, keeping his tone even. The person holding the thick folder adjusted their glasses and offered a stiff smile. "Good morning. As promised, we're here with documentation regarding your unpaid dues and property violations." The man nodded once. "Before you show me anything, I want to remind you that my land isn't part of your association." The smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious look. "Our expansion map shows otherwise. And since you haven't responded to previous notices, we now need to move forward. We have a process for unresponsive owners." He crossed his arms. "I wasn't unresponsive. I just wasn't here. And again, you have no authority over this property." The person with the camera stepped closer, raising the camera as if preparing to take pictures of the cabin. "We'll need to document the violations," they said. He held up his hand, stopping them immediately. "You're not taking pictures of anything on my land? Not until you prove you have a legal right to be here." The camera person paused, unsure of how to respond, and slowly lowered the camera. The man with the folder opened it and pulled out a map. "This is our updated layout. The expansion was approved internally last year. Your property falls within the new boundary." The man took one glance at the map and felt frustration rise. The lines were obviously drawn in a way that suited the HOA, not the official county records. It looked more like someone took a marker and freely extended their territory without permission. "This map has nothing to do with legal land boundaries," he said calmly. "This is just something you printed. It is recognized by our board," the folder holder replied. He raised an eyebrow. "Your board doesn't control the county." The 3 HOA members exchanged bothered glances. The one with the camera spoke up again. "We're trying to handle this without further conflict. But if you don't comply, fees will continue to build. And eventually, the association may have to take action." He asked. The answer came too quickly, like they'd rehearsed it. Action for neglected property, which could include steps toward possession. He stared at them, almost stunned by how casually they said it. "Possession of my cabin? If dues and violations go unpaid long enough, the association can claim the property to recover losses," the folder holder said smoothly. The man took a slow breath, keeping his voice low and controlled. "Let me make something very clear. You don't have the authority to take anything from me. We'll see what the paperwork says," the board member replied. The camera person moved again, trying to snap a picture from the side, but he stepped in front of them. "I already told you you're not doing that. Leave the property." The person hesitated, but the other 2 gestured for them to stop. One of them spoke again. "We'll return with formal notice. You can either sign and acknowledge the dues, or you can deal with the consequences." He kept his expression steady. "Bring whatever you want. I'll be ready." They left shortly after. Not as confident as they seemed earlier, but still determined. Still believing their rules mattered more than real law. When their vehicles disappeared down the road, he let out a long breath and walked back to the porch. He picked up his coffee cup again and took a drink, though it had already grown cold. He stood there quietly for a long time, thinking. They were trying to intimidate him. That much was clear. They were counting on him being tired, overwhelmed, or confused enough to just give in. It wasn't a mistake, it was a strategy. But they didn't understand the kind of person he was. He didn't like conflict, but he also didn't run from it, especially not when someone tried to take advantage of him. Inside the cabin, he reopened his notebook and added every detail from the morning visit. He wrote down the time they arrived, the things they said, the way they tried to take pictures, and even the way they acted when he stood his ground. He also took his own photos of their vehicles. The faces he could capture from a distance, the fake map they showed him, everything. He wasn't going to let this turn into a messy argument with only words and memory. He was building evidence. He didn't know how far the HOA would push this, but he knew they were not stopping anytime soon. A few hours passed, and he tried to distract himself by cleaning the cabin and clearing out old supplies. But even while working, his mind kept replaying the conversation. They really believed they could claim his property as the sun climbed higher. He decided to take a walk into town and visit a local friend who knew the area well. The man lived a simple life and didn't gossip much, but he always had a sense of what was going on in their small community. When he reached the friend's place, found him working on a small shed. The friend wiped his hands on a rag and greeted him warmly. "You're back at the cabin, huh? How's it feel to be home?" "It would feel better if the HOA wasn't trying to claim it," he replied with a dry laugh. The friend raised an eyebrow. "They came up here already?" "Twice," he said. "And today they brought a camera. Told me my land is part of their expansion." The friend shook his head slowly. "They've been doing that to a lot of folks. Acting like they own the whole valley. But your place? That's a stretch even for them." The man nodded. "They're serious about it too." The friend leaned against the shed. "I think they're counting on people not fighting back. Most folks don't want the hassle, but you should go to the county office. Get the official map. Once you have that, their fake one won't matter." He already planned to do exactly that. "Thanks," he said. "I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something." "You're not," the friend replied. "That cabin is yours. Always has been. Don't let them scare you." On the walk back, he felt a little more grounded. It was good to know he wasn't imagining things others saw the HOA's behavior too. But that didn't erase the frustration. When he returned to the cabin, later in the evening, he saw something waiting on the porch. Another paper, another notice. He picked it up and read it. This one was written in a more formal tone, as if they wanted to make it look official. It stated that if he did not contact the HOA within a set number of days, they would take necessary steps regarding non-compliance. He shook his head and folded the paper. They weren't slowing down. They were getting bolder. He stepped inside and placed the notice on the table next to the others. The sight of all those papers stacked together made the situation even more unreal. This was supposed to be his peaceful place, his escape. And now it felt like the center of a storm. That night, as the sky darkened, he sat on the porch and watched the last bit of daylight fade. The soft buzz of insects and rustling leaves filled the air. Normally, it brought him peace. Tonight, it reminded him of how quickly things could change. He wasn't angry. Not yet. But he was determined. If the HOA wanted to keep pushing, then he would push back. And unlike them, he would use the law, not threats. He looked at the cabin, at the land he had taken care of for years, and felt a steady, unshakable resolve settle in. They had made their move. Now, it was his turn. The next morning, he woke up with one goal in mind. He needed answers that came from real authority, not from the three people who showed up wearing matching shirts and acting like they owned the valley. He had spent months away working hard, looking forward to returning to peace. Not a growing stack of threats from an HOA he never agreed to join. He made himself a quick breakfast, though he didn't taste much of it. His mind was already racing through the steps he needed to take. He grabbed his notebook, folded the latest notice into it, and headed to his truck. The engine rumbled to life. He drove down the familiar dirt road with a mix of frustration and purpose. The drive into town took longer than usual. Every mile gave him more time to go over everything that had happened. The first set of papers on his door, the first visit, the second visit, the camera. The attempt to pressure him into accepting their fake map. None of it made sense, not legally and not morally, but he understood why they were doing it. They were used to people giving in, but he wasn't one of those people. When he arrived at the county building, he parked and took a long breath before stepping inside. The cool air and quiet halls helped settle his nerves. He walked straight to the desk where property information was handled. A clerk behind the counter looked up with a polite smile. "Can I help you with something today?" He explained the situation clearly. The HOA, the notices, the fake map, the threats. The clerk listened carefully, their expression shifting from polite interest to concern. Your cabin is on private land that predates that subdivision, the clerk said firmly. There's no way it falls under their authority. That's what I thought, he said. But they're acting like they can claim it. The clerk shook their head and stood up. Let me pull your records so you can have everything in writing. They walked to the back office, returning a few minutes later with several folders and printed maps. The clerk spread the documents out on the counter. This is the official boundary map for the subdivision, the clerk said. And here they pointed to a shaded section is your land. Completely outside of it. The boundaries aren't even close to overlapping. The man studied the maps, feeling relief settle in, even though he already knew the truth. Seeing it stamped and approved made him feel grounded again. You said they're using a new map? The clerk asked. Yes, one they said was approved internally. The clerk let out a soft laugh. Internal approval means nothing. A boundary change must go through the county. And something like that would require new surveys, public notice, hearings, and approvals. That subdivision hasn't filed anything for years. He nodded slowly, absorbing every word. The clerk continued, You're legally protected. They can send you all the papers they want, but none of them hold authority. And they definitely can't take pictures or try to claim your cabin. Can they get in trouble for trying? He asked. The clerk hesitated. Trying to enforce an unapproved boundary can be considered a serious violation. If they continue, it might cross into attempted property interference. He raised an eyebrow. So I should document everything? Absolutely, the clerk said. Keep copies of every notice. Record every visit. Take photos. And if they threaten anything again, you should talk to a lawyer. He thanked the clerk, collected the official documents, and left the building feeling more prepared than he had been since returning home. He wasn't just guessing anymore. He had proof. On the drive back, he decided he wasn't going to wait around for the HOA to escalate again without being ready. He stopped by a small law office on the corner of the main street. The lawyer there was known for handling land disputes and local issues. When he walked in, the lawyer listened to the entire story with a serious expression. They came to your cabin twice. The lawyer asked, Yes, first with threats, then with a camera and a fake map. The lawyer leaned back in his chair. They're overstepping, and depending on what they do next, they might be putting themselves in legal trouble. The man nodded. That's why I came here. I want to know my options. The lawyer tapped a pen on the desk thoughtfully. You already did the right things. You documented everything. You confirmed county boundaries. And you didn't get angry or aggressive when they showed up. The man waited quietly as the lawyer continued. The next step is simple, the lawyer said. Let them make one more mistake. A big one. Something clear and undeniable. Once they do that, we'll have grounds to involve the sheriff, maybe even the county. But you need them to cross the line first. The man felt a small knot form in his stomach. So just wait. Not exactly, the lawyer replied. Keep documenting. Keep your cool. If they post anything illegal on your door or anything, claiming they own your place, call me immediately. And take photos before you remove it. That will be the key. The man understood. The lawyer wasn't teaching him how to fight dirty. He was teaching him how to defend himself properly. He left the office with a calm sense of resolve. He didn't want to fight, but if one came to him, he wasn't going to back down. By the time he returned to the cabin, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. The peaceful glow made everything look softer, calmer. But underneath that beauty was tension waiting to unfold. He parked the truck and walked toward the porch. As soon as he saw the front door, he froze. A new paper was taped there. He walked over and gently pulled it off. This one wasn't written like the others. It was short, direct, and signed by the HOA board. It said, Final notice. Immediate action required. Non-compliance will result in property takeover review. He stared at the paper for a long moment. This wasn't just a threat. This was the step the lawyer told him to wait for. He didn't remove the paper right away. Instead, he pulled out his phone and took several clear pictures of it from different angles. Then he recorded a video showing the paper still attached to the door. After documenting everything, he placed the paper in a folder inside the cabin. He sat at the table, the weight of the situation sinking in. Part of him felt angry, not the loud kind of anger, but the quiet kind that comes from being pushed beyond reason. Another part of him felt strangely calm. He finally understood what this was. Not a misunderstanding, not confusion, but an attempt at control. And they were hoping he would be scared enough to give in. He took a deep breath and opened his notebook again. He wrote down every detail, from the drive into town to the new notice on the door. He copied the wording exactly as it appeared. He recorded how he felt, what he saw, and what time he found it. He wasn't going to let anything slip. Later that evening, he walked the perimeter of his land, checking that everything was still in place. The woods felt quiet, almost too quiet. It wasn't fear he felt, it was awareness. A sense that something had shifted. His land had always been untouched, undisturbed. For years, no one had bothered him. He had chosen this place for peace, for space, for quiet. And yet now he was fighting to keep something he had worked so hard for. As the last bit of sunlight faded, he stood in front of the cabin and looked up at the sky. He reminded himself that he wasn't alone. He had the county records. He had the law on his side. And he had someone ready to help him if things got worse. He walked inside, locked the door, and sat by the window with a cup of warm tea. The world outside was dark, but he could still hear the familiar sounds, the wind through the trees, the distant hoot of an owl, the soft hum of night settling in. He wasn't afraid, he was ready. What he didn't know was that the HOA wasn't done yet. They had made up their minds that his land was something they wanted. And people like that didn't back down easily, but neither did he, and the next time they came. He would have everything he needed to show exactly who they were dealing with. The sun was already up when he stepped outside the next morning, but he still felt the heaviness of yesterday sitting on his shoulders. He had barely slept, thinking through every detail again and again, trying to understand how things had gotten so twisted while he was away. He walked slowly toward the cabin porch, letting the cool air calm him. He needed clarity today, and he needed strength too. The cabin looked the same as always, but now it held a different feeling. Instead of peace and quiet, it carried a strange tension left behind by the arguments and the unexpected claim from the HOA. He stood still for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts, and then he went inside to start the day. He made himself a cup of tea and sat at the wooden table, staring at all the papers spread around, the letters from the HOA, the notices placed on his door. The strange claims about him abandoning the property, it was overwhelming. But he couldn't sit in silence forever. He had to move. So he got up, grabbed the folder he prepared last night, and stepped outside. Today he planned to talk to the neighbors again and gather more details. He wanted to know exactly what had happened in the months he was gone. It's not just the pieces he heard yesterday. The first stop was the small cabin down the path. The older couple living there had always been kind, and he trusted them more than anyone around the area. When he knocked, the door opened slowly, and the older man stepped out with a soft smile. "Morning," he said quietly. As if he already knew trouble was brewing, he asked if they could talk, and the man nodded, inviting him inside. The living room was warm and familiar, filled with soft blankets and the smell of freshly baked bread. The older woman came out and joined them, settling into her chair. He explained what the HOA had told him, how they claimed the property belonged to them now, how they suggested he had abandoned it. The couple exchanged looks, and then the older woman shook her head, her voice gentle but firm. "They were sniffing around your place months ago," she said. "We wondered why. They asked us questions too. Odd questions." He leaned forward, listening carefully. "They asked if you ever talked to anyone," she continued. "They asked if you left the place unlocked, if you were away for long periods, if you ever mentioned selling." He frowned. None of that made sense. He had never spoken to the HOA about any of those things. He had been away temporarily, not permanently, the older man added. Someone from the HOA came by twice. They took pictures. A lot of pictures. Not just outside, they looked around the porch, peeked through the windows. "We didn't like it, but we couldn't stop them. He felt his stomach tighten. This was more invasive than he expected. He asked if they remembered who it was. And the older man described a tall woman with sharp features, always carrying a clipboard. He knew exactly who that was, the same woman who stood in front of him yesterday and spoke with unnecessary confidence. He took out a notepad and wrote everything the couple told him. He thanked them, promised he would keep them updated, and stepped out of the cabin. As he walked down the path, he noticed someone else standing near a fence watching him. The person quickly looked away and pretended to be adjusting a plant, but the movement felt unnatural. He didn't recognize the person, and that alone put him on alert. Instead of approaching, he continued walking, but he kept an eye on the stranger. This wasn't the time to create more tension. Next, he visited another neighbor, a man known for minding his own business, someone who rarely spoke more than a few words. But today, when he knocked, the man opened the door and stepped outside as if he had been waiting. One of them spoke up softly. "We tried reaching you," he shook his head. "No. You tried looking for reasons to take the property." The woman stiffened. "That is a serious accusation," he nodded. "So is trying to take someone's land." The room fell silent. Then he pulled out the statement from the survey company. "I spoke with the team who placed the stakes," he said. "They told me the HOA ordered a boundary measurement for reassignment. You didn't just consider the land abandoned. You were moving forward with taking it." Whispers filled the room. The woman's face tightened. "We acted within our rights," she insisted, but her voice lacked the confidence she had earlier. He looked at her directly. "Show me the rule that says you can claim full ownership of a property." "Because someone is traveling," she didn't answer. "Show me the documented. Warnings sent to me." "Still nothing." "Show me the legal notice." She looked toward the other board members, but they avoided her eyes. The silence stretched finally. He leaned back slightly. "Since you can't show me any of these, I'll be filing complaints. Not just about the attempted reassignment, but about the unauthorized survey, the invasion of privacy, and the false statements made about my property." The woman looked rattled now, and the tension in the room grew thicker. Before she could form a response, the door to the hall opened, and someone unexpected walked in. It was the local police chief. The room fell even quieter. He didn't know the chief personally, but he recognized him instantly. The chief approached the front of the room, nodded to him, then looked at the HOA board. "We received reports of unauthorized access to private property over the past week," the chief said. "I'm here to clarify some questions." The woman swallowed hard. The chief continued. "Entering private land without notice or permission is not allowed, regardless of community regulations. Surveying someone's property without notifying the owner is also a violation." The room buzzed with quiet gasps. Finally, the woman sank slightly into her chair. "We were following community procedures," she said weakly. The chief shook his head. "Community rules do not override property laws. They never have." The realization washed across the room and across the board members' faces. He didn't smile, didn't gloat, didn't make a scene. He simply gathered his papers and stood. "I just want this stopped," he said calmly. "I want the harassment ended, and I want written confirmation that the HOA is withdrawing their claim on my cabin." The board members whispered frantically among themselves. After a moment, one of them, an older man who looked genuinely apologetic, spoke. "We will issue the confirmation," the man said. "Today." The woman glared at him, but the rest of the board nodded in agreement. The chief added, "And we will be monitoring to ensure no further issues occur." With that, the meeting was effectively over. He walked out of the hall into the cool morning air, feeling a mixture of relief and exhaustion. The neighbors outside watched him silently at first. Then several approached him. Some apologized for not stepping in sooner. Some offered support. Some simply nodded at him. Acknowledging what he had done, he didn't blame any of them. He just thanked them and made his way back down the quiet path to the cabin. When he reached the porch, he paused, taking in the sight of the place that had caused him so many sleepless nights recently. But now, standing there, he felt something new, a deep sense of peace settling back into the space. He pushed open the door, walked inside, and let out a long, steady breath. The cabin was his, still his, and no one would be taking it. From him, he placed the folder on the table and sat down, letting the quiet settle around him. The fight was over, and he had won not through anger, but through patience, truth, and persistence. Outside, the trees swayed gently, and the world felt calm again. He knew there would always be challenges in life, but this one reminded him of something important. Sometimes the simplest place, the quietest corner of the world, is worth fighting for. And he had fought, and he had kept it. The cabin remained exactly where it belonged, with him.